Good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I wanted to check in with a lawyer I have a lot of respect for. Pamela Green is her name. She is a partner with the international law firm of Gowling, WLG, LLP. She is the head of the commercial real estate and lending groups at the firm's Hamilton office, as well as sitting on the firm's national real estate executive. And she's got opinion on this new rule, this new law that the city of Toronto was thinking about and could roll out across the province, called Inclusionary Zoning. Pamela, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So tell me, what is inclusionary zoning?
So inclusionary zoning is basically a planning tool that a municipality can use to force developers to include affordable housing in their developments. And it's really meant to address the affordable housing crisis that we have seen get worse and worse over the last number of years. And I'll start with, it will hopefully address those affordable housing stock issues, but you'll find out in a few minutes that maybe I don't share that opinion.
Okay, and so tell us, it's something that the province has made available for municipalities to enact, but the city of Toronto right now is the one municipality that we're talking about. Is that correct?
Correct. On November 9th, they passed their OPA in their zoning bylaw to include inclusionary zoning for specific areas within Toronto. So it's not right across the board. They are looking at basically transit heavy corridors where you've seen a lot of growth in the housing market and a lot of significant increase in housing prices. So they are targeting those areas.
And you used the term OPA. What's an OPA?
An OPA is an official plan amendment. And so that looks at the overall planning that a municipality does within its urban boundaries. And it's a technical step that they have to take in order to pass this bylaw. And
you're saying that it's forcing developers to include affordable housing in their developments. How's it doing that? What are the restrictions, or what are the mandated amounts of affordable housing they need to have?
So what's happening is for new developments, and it's important to note it's for new developments within those designated areas, they're looking at the bigger properties. So you're looking at, I think it's 800, I'm going to look 100 units or more, or 8,000 square feet. So they're looking at larger developments for these inclusions of the affordable units. And what happens is when that developer applies, they have no choice. So they must include certain percentages. I actually do, if I can share screen, have something that shows that.
So you say that the percentages go up over time. What are the percentages?
So for the people that are watching, I have shared a screen that's included in the bylaw, and you'll see that it starts within the particular areas that are targeted at a low of 5% to 7%, going up all the way into 2030, from 11% to 16%. And basically what it's doing is it is encouraging by mandate the inclusion of affordable housing more and more over time. And depending upon the type of housing and where it's located, it gets more and more inclusive.
But what you've also shown is that for rental, it's lower than for condos. And when there's ownership, it actually goes up above 20%, 22% in 2030.
It does, and that's just representative of the housing stock. So when they look at what they want to increase housing stock wise, it is both on the ownership side and on the rental side. So they're looking for those middle to low income families that are starting or trying to get into the housing market. And this is the way to do it, hitting both sides, ownership and rental.
We're talking about inclusionary zoning tonight with lawyer Pamela Green. She's head of the real estate group for Gowlings in the Hamilton office. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Pamela in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. One of the big issues that's in front of the city of Toronto right now, and a lot of real estate oriented people, both developers as well as lawyers and planners, et cetera, have been speaking about this, is something called inclusionary zoning. And Pamela Green, who's a partner with the international law firm of Gowling WLG LLP, she's head of the commercial real estate and lending group at the firm's Hamilton office, is with us tonight. She also sits, by the way, on the firm's national real estate executive. So she's a bigwig in the legal business. Has been explaining inclusionary zoning. And so what I understand is that what you're saying is that the city of Toronto, the province of Ontario, by allowing cities to enact these laws, is interested in making housing more affordable. And so what they're doing is they're mandating that developers in either rental housing or in condo buildings have to have a certain amount of their units be affordable. And it goes from in rental housing, a low of 7%, in condos, a low of 10% of the units today, up to 16% in 2030 for rentals, and up to 22% for condos. So it's a significant portion of the development. What do they define as affordable?
Well, that's a good question, because the definition has now changed, and it's fairly complicated. But it is looking at not just what prices are out there in the market, because those can be manipulated. It is really more looking at what families can actually afford in accordance with their incomes. So the idea is that should much more reflect the market, and hopefully it does.
But I don't understand. If it's market, then it's unaffordable. We all know that the market right now is unaffordable. So how do you make it affordable for the 7 to 10% of the people that supposedly get the right to rent or buy that more affordable unit?
So the formula doesn't go up to 100%. So if you have your rental market sitting at, on average, $1,500 a month, that's not what it's going to be set for the affordable unit that is a rental in that same building. And so the idea is that those rents and those sale prices are set at lower values so that it creates the market for that affordable housing type. And it is kept that way for 99 years.
99 years. Okay, so has the person got to stay in that unit for 99 years?
No, they do not. They do not. But when it changes hands, what the rules say are that those affordable rents and those affordable prices have to stay in place in order to, again, ensure that housing stock is maintained.
Okay, and so there's this big racket in New York of co-ops and housing that you get into, and people pay key money to get into it because it's more affordable. How do we ensure that people that can afford much more don't get these affordable homes?
Well, there's supposed to be some administration that's put in place to govern this, and so that every development that comes along has to abide by those rules and those checks, so that you make sure that doesn't happen. That will all play out in the administration of it, but there are rules that are in place to address that situation.
I understand there's a lottery or something like that to access the units.
Actually, I don't know about that, but I did hear that would be one possibility once you've qualified.
So my understanding is what you've got to do is you've got to qualify based on a level of income that is lower than the median by a significant amount, something like 30% of the median income. And then once you apply, your place in line for these affordable units is chosen by way of a lottery. So it sounds like really quite a strange system. How are these developers going to afford to provide these affordable units?
Well, that is the big question.
That's what
and whether or not whether or not this program will be successful in the end. What is unique to Toronto's IZ is the fact that it does not give any incentives to those developers for including the affordable housing units in their development. So they are not given additional density. They are not given breaks on development charges or other allowances like other cities within North America have done. And so what will happen is that those costs that are added on for those affordable units will then be borne by the other purchasers of the market units within those same developments. So it's going to create a situation where it may slightly improve some of the housing stock at affordable rates, but it will immediately cause the prices of the ones in the vicinity to increase, and it will then perpetuate a housing stock problem by creating one that's just slightly above the other.
So what you're suggesting is that these developers aren't going to provide these 10%, 7 to 10%, going up to 16 to 22% of the units at lower rates out of the goodness of their heart. They are going to, in fact, demand that everyone else, the 90% of the people that are paying market rates, pay more to compensate them for the provision of these affordable units. Is that what you're saying?
It basically is what I am saying. I mean, there are a number of reasons for that, but I like to quote from the West End Home Builders Association, Mike Colin Williams, and he likes to say, there is no such thing as affordable labor or affordable lumber or affordable concrete. And that is really essentially saying that it costs the same to build an affordable unit as it does to build a market unit, but you can't get your same return on it. So that money has to come somewhere. And so politicians especially like to say, well, developers are making loads of money. We'll just take a little bit of their profit. They're making a lot of profit. We'll take a little bit of it. But it really isn't as easy as that. Development is a risky process. It's a lengthy process. And so for both those reasons, it has to have a certain amount of reward for developers to be incentivized to even begin a development. So you deal with that. But then on the other side, how do those developments get built without a pro forma that shows a bank they should lend money for the construction? So you have a dual problem there. You don't really have greed driving the decision. You might have financial feasibility really getting in the way of these developments.
So are they, is the government demanding that for those units that are affordable, the banks charge more affordable interest rates?
They have not, but that might be one solution.
So my understanding is that there was a consultant report that the City of Toronto commissioned for themselves, presented, that said, like you say, that there's something like a dozen different cities in North America that have instituted inclusionary zoning, and all of them but one compensated the developers for that demand inclusionary zoning by providing some incentive, like increased density or quicker time frame for approval, or free or cheaper land or things like that, so that they effectively compensated the developers for that inclusionary zoning. And only one city in North America, other than Toronto, has done it without compensation, and that's Portland, Oregon. And so I think a lot of the people that have looked at it from a consulting standpoint and from a critic standpoint have suggested that that's going to be a problem with the Toronto implementation. The City of Toronto politicians have retorted, my understanding is that no, they've already provided that extra density by effectively building the transit, which has created the demand and increased the zoning in those transit-oriented development areas, those niches that you talked about, those districts that you talked about. So they've already provided that extra density. What do you think?
I think that that's a little bit of a circular argument. It still doesn't bear out in the numbers. So those areas, a number of them were already transit-oriented or slated to become transit-oriented. And you look at the markets there, yes, you will sell for more, you will rent for more, but you still have to build it. Numbers are numbers, and I don't think that it will have the effect that is being sought.
So when the industry said that developers will still demand the same return, which is effectively what you're saying, is the bankers are going to demand the same interest rate, the developers are going to demand the same return, the concrete, the labor, the other people are going to demand the same prices. And so therefore the City of Toronto politicians, I understand, have answered that, saying, well, so therefore the land will be bought cheaper, because if the developers if the market is the market and the developers need the same return, then they're going to have to effectively force the prices for land down so that the cost of affordable housing is going to be borne by current landowners when they ultimately sell to developers. So the price per buildable square foot that one can get for their land in a transit area in the city of Toronto, once inclusionary zoning is put in place, will go down by 10% or something like that. What do you think of that?
Yeah, and I don't believe it, I guess, is the long and short of it. There will be maybe a slight downward pressure because of that, but I don't think that in the end, it will result in enough of a decrease that will incentivize developers to move forward.
So you think that the landowners will demand the same price, the banks will demand the same price, all of the suppliers of the materials, including labor, will demand the same price, which means that you got to price up the balance of the building, the balance of the condos. And so therefore, effectively, by making it more affordable for the few, the government is going to make it less affordable for the many. Is that right?
Correct.
That doesn't sound smart, to make it cheaper for the few that win the lottery and more expensive for everyone else. And particularly for all these new home buyers and new home renters, they're going to be moving in, because this isn't going to impact the general population. This is just going to impact people that are moving into new places. And all these new people are going to bear the burden of this massive new social program.
It is what is being talked about in the industry ferociously at the moment. We are all waiting for what happens in about a year's time. Well, it'll be a little longer than that once this all starts to fall into place. There will be a one-year review that the City of Toronto does, and they'll take a look at what effect this has had, and we'll see. We will see. But I think one of the bigger things that are concerning developers are, if there is a market that could possibly handle these increased prices, it's Toronto. But what happens when municipalities outside of Toronto start to include inclusionary zoning in their districts, where markets clearly cannot? That's going to be a really big problem, and it's a really big concern in the industry today.
No, I think that's the case, but if 80 to 90% of the units are not considered affordable units, and they're unaffordable today, and everyone thinks that housing in Toronto is unaffordable today, your argument is saying they're going to become more unaffordable. They're going to go up in price. How can that be good politics? How can that be good economics? Like it just, what it's saying is that people won't be able to afford to live in Toronto. How can that be a smart decision?
I think that is the issue. I think there's a lot of second guessing as to whether or not this is smart politics. There's even some second guessing that it may be a way to thwart development and cool it down. I mean, we even had the deputy mayor saying something out loud last week about using it to control development. And I think the chief planner immediately stepped in and said, well, no, that's not the intent. But it could be used to do the exact opposite of what it's telling. Why do you want to
control development? We've got something like, a couple million people. I've been told that the statistic is in the next 10 years, the population, the size of the city of Montreal is moving to the GTA. And we're going to we've had people on my show that talk about Toronto CMA becoming the third or second largest CMA in all of North America. Being, after New York, Los Angeles, Toronto CMA being the next largest, bigger than Chicago, bigger than Boston, bigger than Washington, bigger than Dallas and Houston, et cetera. Like, we're growing like crazy, and yet we're still unaffordable. And you're talking about the deputy mayor saying that he wants to limit development?
It was the inference, yes. So we do have a lot of politicians that are not development friendly, let's say. And so I'm not going to speak about all politicians, because obviously they are trying to do their best to address the problem. And there are differing opinions on whether or not this particular program will address it. I just happen to be on the side that I am not positive that it will.
Did you watch the federal leaders debate during the federal election?
A little bit of it, yes.
Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, was asked a question on this issue of affordability, and was asked how you're going to answer the affordability issue. And he actually, I think, answered it really truthfully, maybe not well, but truthfully, because he said there's two sides of it. You've got a whole bunch of people that are young that want to get into the housing market, and it's unaffordable, and they can't live in major cities, and they can't afford the homes, and that's a travesty. But then you got a whole bunch of other people that have already got their homes, that may be a little bit older, and that have built this huge net worth in their house, and don't want anyone to increase supply or do anything that's going to make their home value go down and their net worth go down. It's a challenge, isn't it?
It's absolutely a challenge. We're also probably dealing with a little bit of the baby boomers in that calculation there. There are a number that want to keep that equity or get that equity out of their houses at this point.
So I had someone on my show that said that 70% of the condos in Toronto in the last couple of years were built within 800 meters of a major transit stop, a GO train or a TTC. And so therefore, clearly, these condos, it would appear, are marketing themselves, being demanded by people that are users of transit and that want to get to their job or to their social occasions by way of transit. That's the kind of density that we need to build around major transit areas if we're going to solve our growth challenges. But that's similarly now the area that's going to take this hit of this inclusionary zoning. So we're going to make the areas that we want to have more growth in, that we're going to want to have more housing in, that are attractive to younger people that are taking transit to jobs, for 80 to 90% of them, more expensive. But
correct,
for the few that win the lottery that have got low incomes, cheaper. So the few win out, but most people pay more. And I guess the other thing that bothers me about this is, when we have major new social programs we got this daycare that effectively we're going to have instituted across the country. Everyone in the country that's a taxpayer is going to pay for that. Health insurance, everyone in the country pays for that. Free vaccines, everyone in the country pays for it. With this social program, a major new social program where we're going to have more affordable housing provided for these people, either developers have to pay for it, or if you're right, the developers aren't going to make less, then either new home buyers are going to have to pay for it, or if the city is right, landowners are going to have to pay for it. So you've got a major new social program funded by a very small minority of society. Is that equitable?
Which doesn't make it doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't view it as equitable at all. So that's the issue. You have the development community saying they're willing to partner up and take some of this hit, but this is a complete hit on their side, and therefore there will be a major pass down of those costs. And yes, it is a limited few that are paying for it, and counterintuitive to a social program.
So I had one developer on my show that said the easiest way is to do what a lot of cities in North America have done. It says if you demand 10% inclusionary zoning, you give it, you compensate the developer for that by giving them 10% more density than they otherwise would get. Does that make sense to you?
It does. I mean, maybe not the exact measure, but there are a number of different measures that could help that pro forma become feasible and therefore incentivize a developer to complete a project. There are a number of different tools that could be used to accomplish the same thing, but that's one of them. Give them a little more density. It increases and improves their numbers. Decrease their development charges. It decreases their expenses. So again, a positive on the numbers. There are a number of ways. And there are a number of ways currently being used as well, just not as an effective tool at the moment.
We're chatting with Pamela Green. She's a lawyer with Gowlings, runs their real estate and lending practice in the Hamilton office, is on the national executive of the real estate group for Gallings. We're going to take a break and come back more with Pamela Green in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Tonight's topic is inclusionary zoning. It may be a little bit of a confusing issue to some of you, but I think it's a major new issue that the City of Toronto has just enacted, and the province has passed legislation that allows every municipality to enact inclusionary zoning. And so I think other cities are going to be looking at it. And Pamela Green is our guest. She is a lawyer with Gowland. She's actually a partner, runs their commercial real estate and lending practice in their Hamilton office, is on their national executive for the real estate group of Gowlings, and has an opinion. And it's a pretty negative opinion in regards to inclusionary zoning. Pamela, thank you for sharing some of your thoughts. And we talked about potentially compensating the developers by providing extra density. One of the other suggestions people have given is that you could, as you mentioned, reduce the development charges as compensation. Others have said one of the biggest costs of development, and that impedes more affordable development, is the time it takes to get government approvals. That you've got to submit your zoning application. You got to fight it with either in the past the OMB, or today something new called, what is it, LPAD or something like that?
Ontario Land Tribunal, yes.
And then you got to, ultimately get a site plan approval, and then a building permit, and you got to go through a whole process. And some people have told me that takes 3 to 5 years and a couple $100,000, if not $1 million. Is that true?
It is true. Jurisdictions all vary, but most of them have fairly lengthy processes. And it absolutely is a hit on the bottom line when you can't get a shovel in the ground for 12 to 18 months while you rezone a property. So
do you think that's appropriate? Is the amount of regulation in the real estate business needed? Is it appropriate? Is it called for?
Yes and no. You always want to know that there are proper checks and balances going on. But at the same time, when you're facing a housing crisis like we are facing, part of the resolution might be hire more staff, train more staff, decrease these wait times, and help the problem. And instead of exacerbating the problem, when again, developers are looking at the added cost involved and no relief.
I just can't imagine it actually takes that long to review different developers' plans and approve them.
I'm going to say it does. I will defend municipalities. There are lots of applications that come in that aren't full and complete, and that does make it more difficult. And that means that there's a lot of duplication of review, etc. But at the same time, there's a lot of pushback. We have a number of municipalities that are not development friendly. And so they will push back on all issues, add conditions that are probably too strenuous, that are meant to slow down the process. And so it's harder to get through it. So when you're looking in particular about these major transit oriented areas, perhaps those ones are put on a different track for review. And so they don't get caught up in the same turmoil that other applications might. So
you're a lawyer. You've undoubtedly been involved in a bunch of different businesses. I've had the pleasure of being involved in a bunch of different businesses. And I've always thought about the real estate business as sort of the entrepreneurial capitalist business, because it's, people have been building buildings and renting them out since whenever. And it seems like there's more regulation in the real estate business than in almost any business other than, frankly, the pharmaceutical business, which is a business I used to be involved with. And, I've been in the cosmetics business. I've been in the amusement business. I've been in the hotel business. All those businesses are far easier to get open. And in the real estate business, the planners tell you how many stories you can have, what the density is. They want to know what the outside of the building looks like. They demand how much amenity space you got to have. They tell you how many parking spaces you got to have per unit. It's as if developers are stupid and can't build what the market wants and demands. Government's got to come in and tell developers everything they want to, that they need, they know better, that the planner knows better. Does that make sense, that there's more regulation in the real estate business? And maybe I'm wrong, but my perception is it takes longer to get approval in the real estate business than in any business I've been involved with other than pharmaceuticals. And in pharmaceuticals, it's a life or death decision. So I can understand that. And I think it's completely appropriate. But there's more regulation in that business than growing crops, than launching a tomato soup, than opening a restaurant. Like, why does this make sense?
I'm going to say we live in a province and in a country that absolutely has ideas about saving the public. So in one way, it starts from ensuring that the public gets what they need and being a very big brother in terms of determining what the public needs. So we do have ways to push back on those requirements. Number of parking spots is a good example. Where we're talking about inclusionary zoning, one of the things that will be alleviated are the parking requirements for those affordable units. Part of that is actually just common sense. It's not really an incentive other than the cost savings, because underground parking is expensive to build. But what you have is a population that will inhabit those units that doesn't use parking spots as much. They use transit much more, and therefore it shouldn't be a requirement. So we're looking at things like that, and we push back as a lawyer, conditions that apply to any given development. We absolutely will go back with minor variances to decrease requirements, as an example, or to get ones waived altogether. Not always possible, but we are in a society where we are being told what may be best from a planning perspective, and we may actually not realize how much we might appreciate the fact that you don't have heavy industrial right beside a single family dwelling. So there are good reasons for the planning perspective. Whether it's gone a little overboard, that is a whole other discussion.
But should a planner be able to tell me as a developer whether the material I use on the outside of my building is appropriate or not? And should they be able to tell me how much amenity space I need? Like, as a developer, shouldn't a developer know and be able to tell from the market whether people want a whole bunch of amenity space or a little bit of amenity space? And frankly, maybe it would be helpful to have some buildings with very little amenity space to see if, frankly, people prefer the lower price, the lower rent that they can get, and give up the amenity space and go to the local YMCA or the local fitness center. Why is it that developers, government it would appear, think are so dumb that they need to be told how much parking the market wants and needs, and how much amenity space the market wants and needs, and how the building materials on the outside should look like? Why is the market not the right way to decide all that?
I think that's partly because we don't always trust the market.
But we trust the market in tomato soup. We trust the market in a whole bunch of other ways. Why don't we trust it in real estate? Why are planners it seems like we've got communism in real estate with central planning the right way to go.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to say this is where I might be a little on the opposite side of developers, because I do believe that some of it is quite necessary. I do believe that in a true capitalist society, you'll have too many corners that are cut, and you do want some minimum standards. So I
so I was at brunch with my kids. They're 20s and 30s on the weekend, and they're moving into the King West neighborhood, and they need a parking spot. And the comment was, oh, well, there's parking space for rent everywhere because the parking is way overbuilt. No one's got cars, and there's parking spaces in almost every building available for rent. So in other words, the developers were demanded to overbuild parking dramatically in an area with a whole bunch of 20s and 30s have moved into and don't own cars. And so why is it that government has to demand how many parking spaces apartments and condos need?
So if you don't, there won't be. You'll have the exact opposite problem. I think there are a number of municipalities are faced with the opposite problem. There is no public parking available and very few and far between in the condo buildings. So it is a matter of you have to set a number and then reassess that number. And maybe it's time that it is majorly reassessed, especially in our transit-oriented areas.
So we got a problem with housing. It's unaffordable in Toronto. We've got supposedly more cranes in Toronto than any city in North America. We've got a couple million people moving here in the next 10 years. And so whatever problem we've got is going to become bigger. What's your solution to the problem? How do we make it such that my kids and your kids can actually afford to live in the city of Toronto?
I think the solution is that you look at more than just one tool. So maybe the IZ will work for part, but I think that it can't work for all. And especially city of Toronto and all municipalities will have to look longer and harder about increasing your density within your existing infrastructure, allowing for those incentives to be made, giving realty tax breaks, providing some of the public lands that are owned for nominal prices for those developments, a number of different tools, all used collectively. That's what's going to get us out of this. So
increased density is one issue that you talked about. Do you think the density rules that are currently applied are appropriate in the city of Toronto?
I think they're out of date.
Why?
So, because they haven't kept up with demand. We need, I think, from, I'll say, environmental point of view, to make sure that we are intensifying within that existing infrastructure that I spoke about. So if you're going to do that, you need to build up, you need to build denser. And because of that, that should be incentivized, and those bylaws should be amended for increases.
I had Joe Barrage of Urban Strategies on my show, and he was arguing what you're arguing is for intensification and density and higher density. But he said, people are afraid of it and worried about it in almost a crazy manner because they think it's going to destroy their neighborhoods. And he said, you take a look at Yonge Street. Yonge Street is very dense on Yonge Street and around major transit nodes, and maybe, the whole Yonge Eglinton area, which is a couple blocks. But, Yonge and St. Clair, Yonge and Summerhill, Yonge and Lawrence, et cetera, you move a block off of Yonge Street, you're back to single family homes. And so therefore the intensification happens close to Yonge Street, and frankly, not even all of Yonge Street, just Yonge Street at the major transit nodes, because, a couple blocks south or a couple blocks north of the subway station, you're back to 1 or 2 story kinds of buildings. And you can see that, almost all the way up Yonge Street. And he said that this incredible fear, this NIMBYism is almost irrational, and you've got to have a way of stopping it, because it doesn't actually impact every neighborhood. It only impacts these major transit nodes. And he said, Brian, the proof of the problem I can show you is that there's a whole bunch of developers that are developing major dense high environments around shopping centers, down at Humber Bay Shores, where there was just some industrial activity and old strip motels, and other industrial areas like Downsview Park, et cetera. And the only reason why is because there wasn't neighbors to complain. And that's why you can build on Square One parking lot, because there's no neighbors nearby to complain. And yet there's only a few neighbors that end up complaining. He says the problem is that those squeaky wheels end up dramatically impacting the local councillors. The local councillors end up being almost like the lords of fiefdoms back in medieval Europe that end up getting to decide what goes on. And the councillors next door won't vote against what the local councillor wants to vote because they don't want the local councillor getting involved in their thing. And he says, so the only solution is to get rid of our ward system and elect all of the councillors for the city of Toronto on a citywide basis so that people make decisions for the betterment of Toronto rather than so they get elected in their own little ward. Does that make any sense to you?
It does to a great degree. It is the reason why we have an Ontario Land Tribunal to begin with. It is to take the NIMBYism out of it and have somebody at the provincial level who doesn't have the politics affecting them. But that same rationalization of if you had councillors that had to look at everything as a whole, as opposed to their specific neighborhood, then yes, they might be more inclined to be more objective. Now, you might lose a little bit of the voice that they're supposed to have on behalf of their constituents, and there's going to have to be give and take in that.
If we don't build a whole bunch of extra density in the city of Toronto, it's going to go to Hamilton. It's going to go to Halton Hills. It's going to go to Georgetown. It's going to go to Alliston and Barrie and where the province wants to build this new Highway 413. Is that a good decision?
So I'm not sure that it's a bad decision. And I probably am saying that today because we've gone through COVID and we've gone through working from home. We are going to be stuck with much more flexible work from home, agile work programs, and people will be able to do more work away from the office, so to speak. So increasing development in some of those outer communities might not be such a bad thing after all. The issue will be where really can you and should you have your higher immigration coming in? Where can they succeed best? Might still be the Toronto market. So something to consider.
We're chatting about inclusionary zoning with Pamela Green. She's a lawyer with Gallon. She's a partner in charge of the commercial real estate and lending business in their Hamilton office. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having fun with Pamela Green. She's the lawyer partner in charge of real estate, commercial real estate and lending in the Hamilton office of Gowlings. I met her when she was doing a similar function in Mississauga. She's a very actively involved, community-oriented lawyer. She used to be on the Mississauga art gallery board, and she overbid me at several art auctions, and I got very upset because she always got the best art. And then she invited me to a couple of different jazz concerts that her former firm had, and I'm just very upset that her current firm doesn't have those jazz concerts that I get invited to because they were a lot of fun. The lady that you had provide the wine at your jazz concerts has become a friend of mine, and she once every 2 weeks or so drops off a case of wine. She charges good money for it, but she drops off a case of wine for me, which is kind of nice. So there's been some fringe benefits of our association, Pamela. Thank you for that. You were telling me that Hamilton's got a lot of cranes too.
They do. In fact, they have more cranes up than Toronto does currently.
Really?
They do. They have about 1.5 billion in permits for building this year so far. And that's on who wants to live in Hamilton. More and more people. I do have to tell you, the market is completely changing there. They have been going through a renaissance over the last 5 or so years. I do have some big projects going on where the arena, the concert hall, and the convention center will be revitalized. And there will be some major development going on, probably in the 1 billion mark. So there's a lot happening, and the art and music scene will just get better. I have to tell you that as a real foodie, I am quite delighted with the many, many excellent restaurants in Hamilton, and most of them are not chains. They are unique owners. putting out their stuff, and it's a quite delicious place to eat.
So what's driving it? Is it affordability? Is it a municipality that's more conducive to development? Is it exciting food downtown in Hamilton?
Definitely the exciting food, and definitely I think an environment that is more conducive or becoming more conducive to development, and looking at the many alternatives that there are. The realty tax abatement that I've spoken about is a huge one. And I think that with those types of tools being used by municipalities, you're going to find a lot of development occurring in them. And Hamilton is really being progressive about that these days.
You know, I had one person on my show that said that what's going to happen with this inclusionary zoning rule is you're going to force a lot of people because it's going to be more affordable for the 90% of the people that don't qualify for the affordable units to move to Vaughan, to move to Mississauga, to move to Hamilton, to move to outlining areas. And particularly if you have municipalities, and you know, the example they used was the Vaughan Metro Center, which has got, you know, huge tall buildings built on top of one subway stop that are conducive to development. And it's going to actually maybe be beneficial from those cities' standpoint, but it's going to be the opposite of the intensification that we want. And it's going to end up building all these sort of exurbs around the city of Toronto. Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, since I work in Hamilton, I'm going to say it's a great idea.
So making Toronto less affordable for 90% of the people is actually good, because people are going to move to Hamilton, Mississauga, Vaughan Metro Center, Markham, downtown, etc.
It's not good overall. No, it isn't. As they say, there will be a natural exodus because of agile work. And hopefully what doesn't happen is that this inclusionary zoning pushes that so much quicker out the door that we end up in a bad situation. So keeping fingers crossed.
So I got to give you my 2 cents before we sign off. And that is, you know, I did a major study of social programs when I did my MBA. And it was interesting that what was found is that that whenever you taxed corporations to do something, whether they be development charges or corporate income taxes or things like that, and you wanted those people to pay, they just passed on the cost to the ultimate consumer. And business ended up making a similar return before and after. Sometimes it took a little bit of while to adjust, but the cost went on to the consumer. And you know, carbon taxes that we're currently contemplating are one of those factors. Is that we all accept that the consumers can end up paying the carbon tax. It's not going to be something that the corporations are going to absorb and all of a sudden start making a lot less money. So I think you're right that these development that the cost of the inclusionary zoning is going to be passed on by the developers to the 90% or 80% of the people. And I think that's the worst people to pass it on to, because the new home buyer is the person that's got the biggest problem of getting into the home business. They're typically in their maybe 30s. They're just starting out, and all of a sudden you're going to make it more difficult for them to get a start. And I worry that the only reason why government is not paying attention to them is few of them vote. And the vast majority of people over the age of 60 vote. The vast majority of people under the age of 40 don't vote. And in municipal elections, it's even worse than provincial and federal elections. And so I think this is going to get some of those young people really upset, and it's going to make it unaffordable. They're going to be living in not 500 square foot units, but 300 square foot units. And it's just going to be a disaster. And I think that governments not compensating the developers through either increased density or through faster approvals are making a mistake. And inclusionary zoning is going to end up being a massive problem. And I think that they've got to rethink it. And by compensating them with increased density or reduced time or cheaper land or lower development charges, something is a better way. And bottom line, when you put in place a new major social program, everyone should pay. You shouldn't pick one group that pays. Everyone should pay. It should have come out of general revenue. That's my 2 cents.
Agreed.
Pamela Green, thanks so much for joining us. That's our show for tonight, everyone. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. You can get all my podcasts and videocasts on briancrombie.com, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Speakeasy, Apple Podcasts, and Audible Podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us. Pamela, it's been great to see you again. Thanks so much.
You too.
Good night, everybody.